John. Oops, I'm supposed to do this slide. So here's our agenda for today. Things to consider for summer. So we want you to be thinking about what travel restrictions there are, both maybe to the places you want to go and getting back into the United States, your travel experiences, budget for the summer. We're going to talk a little bit about finances, on-campus employment, if you're a sponsored student, some of the rules for that, and then some more about summer and fall enrollment coming up. So now I'll turn it over to John.
All right, thank you. So the COVID-19 pandemic continues to affect students' ability to travel in and out of the United States. There have been restrictions locally and around the world. These restrictions, lockdowns, and quarantines have made life not easy during the pandemic, and certainly hasn't made travel easy. So there's currently 3 geographical COVID-19 proclamations still in effect. These proclamations place restrictions on both the visa issuance and entry into the United States. And those are for individuals physically present in China, Iran, South Africa, United Kingdom, Ireland, Brazil, and the 26 countries of the Schengen area. So if you haven't been in the travel restricted countries in the 14 days prior to your entry into the United States, then these restrictions do not apply to you. But if you're an F1 student or J1 student in these countries trying to travel right away from one of these countries, then these restrictions will prohibit you from traveling or getting a visa. There are some national interest exceptions that may be available. Students who are traveling from the Schengen area, the United Kingdom, and Ireland who hold a valid F1 do not need to contact an embassy or consulate to seek a national interest exception. They are automatically receive that exception. So if you're traveling from just those areas, the Schengen area, the United Kingdom, and Ireland, and you're an F1 student, you do not need to apply for a national interest exception. You are automatically eligible for that. So if you do, as an F1 student, if you do travel to that area, you can travel back to the US. If you're a J1 student, then you must individually apply for and be granted NIE before entering the US. So J1 students do have to take action to receive that NIE if traveling to the Schengen area, United Kingdom, or Ireland, or traveling from there. So typically that process is you're sending an email to the embassy to request that NIE, but every embassy is different and the process may be different for one embassy from the other. So go to the embassy's website and search for the national interest exception for F1 students, or sorry, for J1 students. And typically they'll have some instructions on what you need to do. Typically it's just an email and you don't have to go there in person. You know, it may be that you do have to in some situations, but because of the pandemic, most embassies are trying to do this virtually. So US embassies and consulates around the world are starting to resume routine visa services, but just due to closures around the world, there's a significant backlog in visa applications. So it's something to keep in mind when thinking about, if you're thinking about traveling and need a visa, you'll really need to plan well in advance, apply for that visa application well in advance of when you need to return to the US. So there are visa interview waivers available. So if you have received a visa in the last 48 months and you need to renew your visa, then it's possible to waive the in-person visa interview requirement. So that's probably not many people fall into that category, probably, if you're a current student and traveling back home, because typically the visas are longer than that, or your period of travel doesn't meet that criteria. So it may be possible for some of you, but it's probably only going to, this is probably only going to be true for a few of you, where your visa has expired in the last 48 months, or you've applied for the visa in the last 48 months and it's also expired. Expiring soon, you need to renew it. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So obviously travel will not be the same as you've experienced in the past. So due to the fluid nature of the pandemic, circumstances could change suddenly or dramatically between the date of your departure and the date that you plan to return. So it's really important that you prepare for those changes or those disruptions, and be sure that you have a contingency plan on how to make plans to get back to the U.S. if those were to change, or if something were to happen. So we have been advising that if you don't need to travel, probably now is not the best time to be traveling. Although some of the restrictions are easing and embassies are opening, it's still not the best time to be traveling, just because the fluid nature of the pandemic means that your flights could be canceled at any time. New travel restrictions or lockdowns to the countries that you're traveling to could be in place. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. And so for that reason, we're advising, if you don't have to travel, it's probably best that you wait until travel's a little more steady, and situations surrounding COVID-19 are a little more predictable. But the main thing is to have a contingency plan. So buying flight cancellation insurance is one way to see that, because we saw in the past that flights can be canceled quite frequently. If you're flights leaving from the U.S., flights coming to the U.S., especially in countries where there's lockdowns or surges in COVID-19, if you're looking at your country and you're seeing a surge in cases, that's something to keep your eye on, because obviously that could affect your travel plans and your flights. So when traveling, there's going to be lots of things to keep in mind. There's current travel bans for the U.S. government, but there's also going to be restrictions and travel bans and self-isolation requirements, testing requirements, vaccination requirements to the countries that you're traveling to. There's currently no vaccination requirements for traveling to the U.S., but when you enter the U.S., the U.S. is requiring all air passengers arriving from a foreign country to get tested no more than 3 days before their flight departs. And then they have to provide a negative result or documentation of having recovered from COVID-19 before boarding the flight. So you would need a viral test that is testing for a current infection within 72 hours of your departure. So that's a new change probably that if you haven't traveled in the spring, that you're going to have to be aware of when coming back to the U.S. So when traveling, you want to be sure that you're meeting the exclusions from the travel restrictions list that we mentioned in the previous slide. You want to carry all required documents for entry to the U.S., your passport, your valid visa, and your signed I-20. So there's still a requirement for you to have a valid travel endorsement on your I-20. SEVP has revised the rules regarding the I-20, so we can actually send you a electronic copy for you to print and sign and use for travel. So if you need a travel signature to either travel back to the United States, or you plan to travel this summer out of the United States, you can submit a travel request, an ICAT, And we typically we would advise that you do that weeks in advance of your travel so that you have it to re-enter. But since we can do electronic copies, you don't necessarily need it before you leave. But it's always a good idea to have that in your hand when you're leaving so that you don't forget about it when you're coming back. So if you know you're going to travel, go ahead and submit a travel request in ICAT, and we can usually get that back to you within 3 to 5 days. So carry all the required documents for re-entry, your passport. You got to have a valid visa. So check your visa expiration date. If your visa has expired, that's might be something that you might want to reconsider your trip about, just because of the things that we mentioned. Visa applications are difficult to, or visa interviews are difficult to obtain right now. Some wait times are in months long, so keep that in mind. It's we recommend that you would carry clear travel history documentation, so it shows, like, if you're traveling to another country and you've been out of your country that's had a restriction on it for 14 days, you need to be able to demonstrate that. So be sure to check for travel restrictions to the country you're visiting, as well as the country you're transiting through, and then be prepared for that COVID test when you're entering the U.S. All right, Franny, I'll pass it to you.
All right, thank you. So travel inside the US is also subject to some limitations at this time. So the US does have some general restrictions and then restrictions that are specific to each state. So if you will be traveling domestically, so flights between Kentucky and another state, make sure that you're looking ahead to the state that you're entering to find out if there are going to be requirements for isolation or testing or anything like that. Generally, the CDC does have pretty clear recommendations for domestic travel, including air travel, for those who are both vaccinated and unvaccinated. So they have a chart on their website that if you're going to be traveling inside the US, I recommend taking a look at. And it does kind of break down exactly what's expected for each of those groups. So for those who have been fully vaccinated, self-monitoring symptoms and wearing a mask and social distancing is still required. But if you've not been fully vaccinated, in addition to those precautions, you are also expected to get tested 3 to 5 days after travel and self-quarantine for 7 days, and 10 days if you don't get tested. You are also expected to be tested 1 to 3 days before travel. So if you're going to be flying domestically, make sure that you either have that test in advance, or if you've been fully vaccinated, you have your record of vaccination so that you can get on your flight and take your trip. And then once you arrive to the other state, you'll make sure that you're practicing and following any guidelines that are specific to that state. Keep in mind that these recommendations may change or evolve even over the course of the summer. So you'll want to keep checking on those things, both when you make your initial travel plans and then once you're ready to depart, make sure that you have the most updated things. You should also be checking with the airline to see if they have any other additional precautions that you should be taking and planning for. And Seth will go to the next slide and we'll talk about if you're planning to remain in the US. So I know many students who have been enrolled and are inside the US plan to remain here, since, as we've said, travel is still really challenging at this time. The fluid nature of the pandemic has meant that many students have canceled travel plans, might have otherwise traveled this summer, and won't be. So I want to kind of go over what that's going to look like if you're a continuing student remaining in the US after the spring semester and into the fall semester. So keep in mind that for the fall semester, we are having our return to normal enrollment. So you need to be kind of thinking ahead to that as you're making your plans. If you're a continuing student in the summer, it is considered a vacation term and enrollment is not required. But of course, you have the option to enroll in courses for your program if you choose to. So if you're a continuing student, you could choose to take classes at UK or at another US school just like you would in a normal summer. Or you can plan not to be enrolled and still maintain status if you're planning to enroll for the fall semester. In the fall semester, as I said, we are planning a return to normal enrollment. And what that means is the in-person enrollment requirements will go back in place. So during the spring and fall semester, and then this spring as well. So to kind of roll that back, we've had about 3 semesters of adjusted enrollment where SEVP has allowed for more online enrollment than normal. And that was to accommodate students who might have been stuck outside the US or chose to return home and enroll from outside the US. But now we will, as a university, be returning to more in-person courses. And that means to maintain F1 or J1 status, you will need to meet the normal enrollment requirements, where you are limited to only 1 online or distance learning course counting toward your full-time enrollment. So as a reminder, for undergraduate students, that full-time enrollment minimum is 12 hours. So only 3 credits or 1 course can count toward your full-time enrollment that's online. So you have to have 3 in-person classes at a minimum. So up to it's 9 credits in person, and then anything else could be online. For graduate students, 9 hours is the minimum enrollment. So only 1 course could be online, 6 credits need to be in person. So that's back to our normal F1 regulations. And for J1 students, it will be return to all in-person enrollment is what we're expecting. So any online courses that J1 students take need to be above that minimum enrollment requirement. So this is for the fall semester again. So summer, you can take online classes, you can take in-person classes, you can take no classes at all if you're a continuing student. But once the fall arrives, to maintain status, students will need to be on campus in at least with no more than 1 online course counting toward their full-time enrollment. So for students who are outside the US when the fall semester begins, it will be important for you to contact our office and let us know that you won't be returning, and we can temporarily inactivate your SEVIS record. And then you would contact us when you're ready to physically return to campus, and we may be able to reactivate that. We'll work with you to help you get the documents necessary to regain your F1 or J1 status and come back and continue your courses. But it will no longer be possible for students to be enrolled from outside the US and maintain their F1 or J1 status. Those students who are doing that from outside the US can continue to enroll at UK. So you still would, check if online enrollment is possible in the country where you are. You would check with the university for that. And then if that is possible, you could continue to enroll if the courses are available, but your immigration status would be temporarily inactivated during that time. And then you would continue to enroll with a plan to be on campus, and then let us know when you're coming back. So if you will be outside the US, just go ahead and contact our office so that we can take action on your record. And then once you're ready to come back, you'll contact us again so that we can get everything ready for you to return. Remember that if you're going to be dropping classes, that online minimum is still going to be in place. So really plan ahead with your advisor to make sure that there are going to be sufficient in-person classes for you. So we always recommend, not enrolling just in that minimum, but having a little bit of flexibility with some additional coursework if possible. So remember that if you are an undergraduate student, you're only enrolled in 12 credits and you have 1 online class, you can't drop those other classes because you might end up exceeding that minimum. So make sure you have enough, in-person courses to make sure you can maintain status. And then if you change your mind, you make travel plans later, make sure, you're checking all the things John just went over. And then if you have any questions or you're not sure what your enrollment requirements or your timeline is going to be, reach out to our office and talk to us about that. Make sure if you are a sponsored student, so if you're at UK based on government or otherwise a sponsored scholarship, make sure that you're checking with your sponsor before you make any of these kind of decisions, before you decide to travel outside the US, or before enrolling in online classes or dropping classes. Make sure that your sponsor is aware and you're still meeting the requirements of your scholarship as well. So what I've talked about generally is for maintaining immigration status, but if you have other rules that kind of that you're subject to as well, make sure that you're also considering those. Okay. And then I'll pass it over to Seth.
Thank you, Franny. So we know that with travel uncertainties this summer, you may find yourself living in Lexington and in need of some additional financial help or support. And so we just wanted to remind you that F1 and J1 students are permitted to work more than 20 hours per week on campus during the summer break. And that's a really great opportunity to earn some extra money while you're here staying in Lexington. A couple other resources that may be of benefit to you as you think about your finances and budgeting for this summer and into the next academic year. The Office of Financial Wellness offers some really great educational opportunities to help you understand your current money situation, your current budget. And they have some staff there that can help you create a budget for the summer and into the fall semester so that you're able to plan a little bit better and help relieve some of the stressors of trying to manage academic work and also your financial budget as well. The Big Blue Pantry continues to be a service that's available for all of our UK students on campus. So the Big Blue Pantry is for students who are experiencing food insecurity or hunger. So any student with a UK valid ID is eligible for food. There's no questions asked. You can go to the Whitehall classroom building and room 25. So that's in the lower level and the basement level. And they're open Monday through Friday from 1 to 5 p.m. So it's a no questions asked. You're allowed to go in there as many times as you need to get the food that you need for your life. So another really great resource for you. There's also childcare and dependent grants offered through the UK Student Government Association. So for students who have families and need some additional financial support, they offer grants that can provide help with purchasing diapers, formula, daycare, as an example for your dependents or children in your lives. I've included the link here on the website, but there's just a really simple application on the Student Government Association's website for seeking out this additional support. UK also works with every student who's experiencing financial or other sort of concerns. And the main office that manages this support is called the Center for Support and Intervention. And you are encouraged to support any needs or issues that you're experiencing through the online form here. And we can be sure that you have access to these forms. We can send out this PowerPoint after the presentation to you all who have attended, so you get access to this information. But if you're experiencing any sort of needs, we encourage you to go ahead and report that so that the university can work with you and help support you to the best that we can. And finally, I just want to give a little preview that our office is opening our International Student Tuition Scholarship. So for students who are experiencing any financial need and need help with paying parts of their tuition, our scholarships offer a small amount of help, but that range from about $500 to $3,000 depending on your financial need. And you're going to be receiving an email early next week with instructions on how to apply for this scholarship and the scholarship requirements and the scholarship deadline. But I just wanted to give you a little preview that you should be receiving that information early next week. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to stop recording.